Hi everyone, and welcome to another thrilling installment of one of my amazing Explain Everything videos. This one is specifically, has to do with the thesis paper. Even more specifically than that, has to do with an annotated bibliography and the crafting of an annotated bibliography. So there's been an example up in the resources section for at least one class for about 2 weeks. Sorry, other periods that somehow got messed up. But I'm going to try and just go through this with you real quick. It's really pretty simple once you figure out what it is. So the first thing we need to cover is, what is an annotated bibliography? Hopefully you guys know what a bibliography is, because you should have been including them at the end of your papers probably for a very long time. The bibliography, as you know, is kind of, it's the list of sources that you've used while you are researching a topic, whether that be for a history paper, an English paper, a science paper, whatever. If you've used outside sources that you've cited in your paper, you need to have a bibliography at the end of your work. Perhaps sometimes you've called them references, perhaps sometimes you've called them works cited, whatever. That is the bibliography. An annotation is a summary. It's an evaluation. So an annotated bibliography is a list of your sources, an organized list that you've done according, in our case, to the Chicago Manual of Style. So that would be all of your materials, your books, your articles, documents, videos, what have you. And each one of those citations has an accompanying paragraph that describes, explains, and or evaluates each entry in terms of quality, authority, and relevance. The next question you probably have is, why do I need to do this, Ms. Canito? This kind of sucks. I know. But here's the thing. The general purpose of an annotated bibliography is to, in this case, illustrate the quality of the research that you've done. That if you were publishing like a scholarly paper, this would be a way to let other people know about the kind of sources that you've used. This might be helpful for someone else compiling research. They may, know to stay away from a certain source or to go someplace, along the lines that you did. So that's kind of, the big purpose of an annotated bibliography. For our class, for my purposes, I'm asking you to do this so you don't have to bring all of your sources physically into class so that I can check them. So you're welcome. Instead, you guys are going to write me these little paragraphs that are going to let me know that you have found quality sources for your thesis papers. So let's spend a little time going over what your annotation should look like and what they should include. So an important thing you're going to want to do in each annotation for each one of your sources is you're going to want to summarize. You're going to want to include at least some summary of your source. What are the main arguments of this source you're using? What's the point of this article that you're looking at? What topics are they covering? If someone asked you what this book was about, what would you tell them? So, for summarize, that's pretty much it. It's also important that you assess this source. This is a source that you're hopefully going to use in your thesis paper. So you're going to want to tell me why this is a useful source for you. Is this the most useful source you have so far in your bibliography? Why is that? Why is this information reliable? Is this information reliable? Do you see a bias in this source, which may or may not still work for your thesis paper? What is the goal of this source? Because remember, for a lot of these, particularly the books, I want you to find things that have their own argument. So there should be, some goal that you can recognize. You're also going to find it helpful to do a little reflecting. How is this particular source going to fit into your research overall? Why is this source helpful for you? What direction is this leading your argument in? How are you going to use this? So these are some of the big things that I'm looking for. In the next slide, I'm going to go a little more into detail about elements you may want to include. So these are just some suggestions of things that you can include in your annotations. You do not necessarily have to include these, but I just want to give you a sense of what you might want to look for. So perhaps it might be a good idea to qualify the author of your work. Maybe you want to say, based on 20 years of study, Professor blah 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 of, University of Awesome. So if you put that in there, then I know this is probably a reliable source. This guy's been working on this for a long time, and assume we a tenured professor at the University of Awesome. Who wouldn't want to go there? I think you would definitely want to address the purpose or the scope of your source. Again, what is the goal of this source? Why is the author doing what they're doing? That's going to be really important in kind of the evaluation. Audience and level of difficulty. Who is this meant for? Is this a scholarly article that is meant for other professionals in a certain field? Is this kind of one of those, general New York Times bestseller history books that are meant to fly off the shelves? Is this for a college course? Is this for a middle school class? I hope not, because you're supposed to stay away from those. But this is good stuff for you to recognize also. It's also good to recognize sometimes the things that are not so great. So maybe you found this great book with a ton of information, but it's also okay if you want to put in that, this is a little difficult for me to read, but I'm trying to get through it. Another thing that's really important to include, if you can, if you find it, is if the author has any bias towards the topic. This is, sometimes it's subtle in history, but it can be there just based on what kind of historian you're looking at. If you're looking at a historian who is much more interested in, let's say, social history than military history, then if you're reading their take on World War II, it's probably going to be a lot more about maybe the friendships that were formed at the front or how people were doing back home than the actual military strategy that went into things. If your topic is about military strategy, then this is something you need to be aware of. Even just, and again, it's not necessarily going to affect your entire paper, but you want to see what the author is really focusing on. Findings, results, and conclusions. It may still be a little early in your process to be making conclusions already. If you've gone through these sources thoroughly, then I'm a little more comfortable with you already kind of coming up with results. But eventually your sources are going to help you reach a conclusion. Remember, you can add sources to this list when you're done. Just, make sure they're all appropriate. If you feel comfortable enough that you've really gone through all your books, all your articles, all your documents, all what have you, and you feel like you can, kind of answer your thesis question and come up with a thesis statement, then by all means, feel free to, share how that book has led you there or what it has contributed to lead you to that point. For something like this, if you want to include something more that, I'm thinking that maybe because of this information, I'm leaning towards this conclusion, I think you can put that in too. I would actually encourage you not to necessarily be super definitive at this point, but it's something you can add if you need to. Alright, finally, format and special features. This is not really super important overall for our purposes. If you do one later on in your academic career, this kind of thing may be more important, like if it's going to help someone else come up with their own, sources. But, you may want to include, this book has a really great bibliography that led me to even more great sources. Or it had a really helpful index. Or, maybe it had really great pictures that are going to help you. They're so great that you're going to try and scan them in and maybe add them as an appendix to your thesis paper, which would be pretty cool, by the way. So these are just things to keep in mind. So you've seen some examples of annotated bibliography entries on the example I gave you before. There are a couple of things I want you to keep in mind when you look at examples like this. First of all, they will probably have some type of entry already there. They're not going to be in Chicago, the examples I gave you. This, I'm assuming, is MLA, but I do need you to remember that we are following the Chicago Manual of Style for our thesis paper. Why? Because arbitrarily, that is the citation style for the history discipline. I don't know. But you might be asked to do it later, so you're doing it now. Instead of having to figure out how to do that all on your own, please remember that you can go to Noodle Tools, set up a project specifically for your thesis paper. Make sure you select Chicago Manual Style. Do the advanced. It's just going to have more options for you, even if you don't use most of them. Just click advanced or whatever the highest level is. Do not create your own Noodle Tools account that you have to pay for. Log into the school website. Then go to the library database section. Go to Noodle Tools. You need to create an own personal account if you haven't done it yet. But do not pay tons of money for Noodle Tools. It's free through our school. So I'm not going to, bother you guys by, reciting this whole bibliography, this whole annotation to you, because you can all read. So, but this is, again, just another example. Take a look at what this person has decided to include in their assessment of this particular source. Are they looking for bias? Are they talking about how useful the source is going to be? Is there something notable about this source? These are the kinds of things you should be looking for in your own sources. I know it's easier to just get things from a library and say, hey, it's on my topic. Good enough. But these are things you actually need to use in order to prove your point. Because remember, in your thesis paper, you're making an argument. And you're trying to prove that you are right. If you want to prove that you are right, you cannot just say, I told you so. You have to actually, have evidence to back it up. So, again, that's the whole point of me asking you to do this. And I want to see that you guys have come up with reliable sources and that you've actually taken the time to look over those sources. So, I'm going to leave it at that for you guys. I hope this was helpful. Remember that you can ask me for help if you have any questions at any time, and I will do my very best. Good luck, and good night.